Hey heroes, and welcome to another extreme episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Even before his birth, the story of Nathan Summers is a complicated one, fraught with conspiracy. His very conception was part of a complicated scheme concocted by the insane superhuman geneticist Mister Sinister. I talked about those events previously on the channel, notably in my video about Madelyne Pryor, so check the links in the description for more details, but the short version is as follows. Seeking the destruction of his former master, Apocalypse, Sinister plotted to breed an even more powerful superhuman, and ultimately became convinced that he could accomplish this by combining the DNA of the young mutants Scott Summers and Jean Grey, aka Cyclops and Marvel Girl. To this end, Sinister created a clone of Jean named Madelyne Pryor, who gained consciousness after the real Jean seemingly perished at the end of the Dark Phoenix Saga. Given false memories to hide her origins, Madelyne soon met the man that she'd been programmed to fall in love with, and before long the two were married, and Maddie was pregnant just as Sinister intended. Born in the Xavier Mansion in Westchester County, their son was named Nathan Christopher Charles Summers. Scott wanted to name him Christopher after his father, and Charles was of course in reference to Charles Xavier. However, Madelyne gave him the name Nathan as a subconscious nod to Mister Sinister's real name, Nathaniel Essex. Shortly after Nathan's birth, another member of the Summers family, Rachel, forged a psychic link with him and vowed to look after him as a big sister. Technically, she was the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey from an alternate future timeline, but that's a story we've covered before. Scott was often distracted from his fatherly duties by ongoing mutant rights issues, resulting in marital troubles, which only got worse when he learned that Jean Grey was still alive. Scott and Jean reunited and, alongside the other original X-Men, formed the mutant team X-Factor. Meanwhile, Sinister soon made his move, abducting the newborn Nathan and sending his marauders to kill Madelyne. However, Madelyne survived and eventually joined forces with demons from the hellish Limbo dimension, becoming the villainous Goblin Queen. In a fit of madness, Madelyne intended on sacrificing her own son in a ritual to permanently join the Earth to Limbo, but in the end, Nathan was saved by the X-Men and X-Factor, and the Goblin Queen destroyed herself in a failed attempt to take the heroes with her. In the aftermath of all this, having learned that Madelyne was her clone, Jean Grey became a surrogate mother to Nathan, regarding him as her own child. Later, when Apocalypse learned of Sinister's machinations, he kidnapped Nathan and infected him with a deadly Techno-Organic virus, which the members of X-Factor were unable to cure even after rescuing him. In the midst of this conflict, however, Scott and Jean were approached by a woman from the 38th century who offered to save Nathan's life by bringing him back to her time. This woman, identified by trading cards of all things as Jen Askani, was actually a member of the Askani Sisterhood, a group that was formed by a divergent version of Rachel Summers in the far future timeline Reality 4935, a world where Apocalypse had already conquered the Earth and ruled it for over a century. Under Apocalypse's rule, the world was divided into a caste system based on genetic potential, with humans, synthcons, and even low-level mutants forced to live hand-to-mouth on the bottom rungs of society. After winding up in that time period for reasons we explained elsewhere on the channel, a future Rachel Summers founded Clan Askani to oppose Apocalypse, and over time the group grew into a religious order that deified the ancient X-Men, with Rachel becoming known as the Bright Lady, or more commonly as Mother Askani. For context, the word Askani is a term from that era that means outsider. As Mother Askani, Rachel preached that the sacred timeline should be preserved and nurtured through the careful and methodical use of time travel. The clan developed their own unique martial arts, a ceremonial language, and tenets such as "what is, and thanks for today, please for tomorrow," which encouraged its members to embrace and accept their circumstances, but to look to the past for hope in the future. Some of their members successfully unlocked latent psionic abilities through discipline and training, allowing them to perform what became the Askani's traditional meditation pose by levitating upside down. They were also often trained in the use of a weapon called a scimitar, which was designed to focus psionic energy. Notable members of the Askani included Blacksmith, a mutant mechanic who became Rachel's first disciple and mentored their new recruits. There was also Tanya Trask, a time-traveling mutant from slightly before the Marvel Age, and the daughter of the infamous Sentinel inventor Bolivar Trask. When Tanya's powers first manifested, they caused her to become lost in the time stream, nearly leaving her mindless, but Rachel rescued her, and Tanya eventually became the Askani High Priestess, Madam Sanctity. Mother Askani also prophesied the eventual coming of the Askani son, who became a messianic figure within the clan. As such, she was the one who sent Jen Askani back in time to retrieve Nathan, intending for him to fill that role. Cyclops begrudgingly let him go, and X-Factor's artificial intelligence ally, Ship, went with him by laying dormant within Nathan's body. For context, Ship was originally the operating system for a sentient celestial starship that was used by Apocalypse, but ultimately betrayed him and sided with X-Factor. Upon his arrival in the 38th century, Mother Askani did what she could to stymie the progress of the virus, but knowing that he was their best weapon against Apocalypse, also had the infant cloned as a backup plan, in case he couldn't be saved. One of her followers, a man named Throwblood, vocally opposed the idea, considering it too close to the kind of eugenics that their enemies employed, but he ultimately acquiesced. However, Apocalypse learned of the child's arrival, and his forces, the Canaanites, launched an assault on Clan Askani, during which Rachel was badly injured. Many members of the clan were killed during the raid, including Throwblood, but in the confusion a SynthCon member of Clan Askani named Boak escaped with Nathan. The clone, however, was seized by Apocalypse, who believed it to be the original, and decided to raise him as an heir, in a manner of speaking. Meanwhile, despite being weakened by her injury, Mother Askani successfully pulled the minds of Scott Summers and Jean Grey forward in time, placing them in pre-prepared bodies that were genetically similar to their own, which had been created using cloning technology and DNA from their descendants. The point in time from which Scott and Jean's minds were pulled was less than a week after they became husband and wife, during their honeymoon. Rachel also attempted to allow Scott and Jean to use their mutant powers in these cloned bodies, but in her weakened state, she was only able to endow them with a fraction of their full potential, and the effort drained what little strength she had left, causing her to fall into a coma. In the midst of this, Nathan was captured by one of Apocalypse's trusted servants, the mutant cyborg Chevere, whose backstory is a whole other can of time-traveling worms. Ironically, Chevere had no idea that this infant was the one his master was after, and had only taken him because an ally of Clan Askani was trying to protect him, and so he assumed that he was important. In any event, even with significantly weakened abilities, Scott and Jean were able to rescue Nathan and escaped with Rachel's unconscious form. After that, Scott and Jean took the aliases Slim and Red Dayspring, and over the following years they raised Nathan, helping him keep the Techno-Organic virus at bay while posing as regular humans to stay off of Apocalypse's radar. At one point, the Daysprings met a cyborg named Pryor Turin and joined forces with his group of Askani-inspired dissidents, Clan Rebellion. Eventually, Nathan Dayspring, as he was known at the time, began to develop telekinetic powers of his own, and Red taught him how to use them to exert control over the virus in his body. Meanwhile, Apocalypse was raising Nathan's clone, Stryfe, who he had named after an enemy he'd encountered many centuries prior. Ironically, the boy that Apocalypse raised would one day travel back in time and actually become that enemy, and so Stryfe was paradoxically named after himself. In any event, Apocalypse planned on using Stryfe as a new host body, as his own natural form had grown old and frail after roughly 7,000 years of life. Believing that this fundamentally went against Apocalypse's own teachings and philosophies of survival of the fittest, Chevere betrayed his master and aided the Daysprings and Clan Rebellion. This situation culminated in a battle in which the Daysprings interrupted Apocalypse's attempts to transfer his essence into Stryfe's body. This effectively killed Apocalypse as his previous body crumbled and his mind was prevented from taking root in a new one. In the midst of that conflict, Mother Askani awakened from her coma and mentally contacted Nathan, helping him fully master the techniques that his mother had been teaching him so that he could telekinetically keep the TO virus from spreading throughout his body without conscious thought. The drawback to this is that his otherwise vast telepathic and telekinetic powers were severely limited, as his body focused so much of its energy on autonomically managing the viral load. As a result, Nathan would subsequently learn to rely on high-tech weaponry in battle rather than his mutant powers. Shortly after Apocalypse's defeat, Rachel succumbed to death, and with her no longer there to anchor them, Scott and Jean's minds returned to the time period from whence they came. Of course, even with Apocalypse destroyed, the Earth would not be freed overnight, and in his absence a regime called the New Canaanites arose and seized control. Chevere, meanwhile, took in Stryfe and raised him. However, the young clone still considered himself Apocalypse's rightful heir, and sought to claim the vacant throne. To this end, he activated and reprogrammed a prototype android called Adam Unit 0 to serve him. As for Nathan, he met up with the surviving members of Clan Askani, now led by Madame Sanctity, and was heralded as the prophesized Askani son. While not overly enthused by his messianic role, Nathan did make some lifelong friends here, including Aaliyah, who also went by the chosen Askani name Jen Scott, and Tetherblood, who was the son of the deceased Clan Askani member Throwblood. There was also Blacksmith, who successfully extracted the ship AI from within Nathan's body. Taking the name Professor, the AI became one of Nathan's closest allies, even something of a surrogate father figure and mentor. Meanwhile, when the Askani stronghold was attacked by the new Canaanite armada, destroying many of them, Nathan escaped with the survivors, including Jen Scott, Tetherblood, and Blacksmith, and organized them into a group of freedom fighters known as Clan Chosen. Nathan believed that Madame Sanctity was killed in the attack, but in truth she was taken by Stryfe, who used Zero to find her in the confusion, faked her death, and convinced her to join forces with him and tutor him in the use of his burgeoning psionic powers. Stryfe also killed Chevere and began gathering followers to build an army of his own, which regularly clashed with both the new Canaanites and Nathan's Clan Chosen. At some point after that, Nathan learned that complicated time travel shenanigans involving the original X-Men were causing temporal vortices in his own era. Long story short, the original 5 X-Men, including a teenage Scott and Jean, had been brought forward in time over a decade, and had a number of adventures that their older counterparts didn't remember having, and in some cases even underwent notable physical changes, such as the Angel's wings. To fix all of that, Blacksmith installed in Nathan's Techno-Organic left arm a temporal core, as well as a program called Grey Malkin, named after the street where Xavier's mansion was located, that connected him to a series of safe houses, allowing him to body slide and time slide, which is a fancy way of saying he could teleport and time travel. Nathan jumped back to that contentious point in history and intended on forcing the original X-Men to return to their own time, but ironically, after attacking and subduing Iceman, he was opposed by his own older self, Cable. Annoyed by the fact that Cable hadn't already fixed the temporal issue, Nathan actually executed his own future self. Complicating matters further, in the midst of all of this, the time-displaced X-Men were also being targeted by a mutant-hunting cyborg from Rachel Summers' original timeline named Ahab. This culminated in a sizable conflict involving the X-Men of two different eras, but in the end Nathan succeeded in undoing the physiological changes to the original five before sending them back to their proper place in time, where their memories of the future were suppressed. The young Nathan subsequently spent more time in the past, where he was known as Kid Cable, and even fought alongside his older self when he was resurrected during the Krakoa era, a period of time in which the X-Men established a method of reviving nearly any mutant whose mind had been recorded by Cerebro. I will note that whether Kid Cable and his older counterpart are actually the same individual at different points in their relative timelines, or simply divergent incarnations of Nathan Summers, is somewhat ambiguous. If, for the sake of argument, they are the exact same individual, then it must be the case that Nathan's memories of his time in the Marvel Age as Kid Cable faded or were suppressed after returning to the 38th century, since, much like the original 5 X-Men, he learned things during these adventures that he didn't know when he was older, which is also why we're not going to delve any further into these events here. Of course, if they are simply divergent counterparts, then the whole thing is kind of a moot point. Time travel is complicated. The important thing is that after the fall of Clan Askani, Nathan and Clan Chosen spent decades fighting both Stryfe's forces and the new Canaanites. In the midst of this, Nathan married his friend and ally, Aaliyah, aka Jen Scott, and adopted her son, Tyler, who also took the surname Dayspring. Tyler had the mutant power to mentally link himself with others and project their memories as solid holograms, and while Aaliyah helped him refine these abilities, Nathan taught him how to fight. Eventually, however, there was a battle in which Jen Scott was killed, and Tyler was taken captive by Stryfe, who brainwashed him into turning against his adoptive father. In a subsequent battle, Tyler took a member of Clan Chosen named Dawn Silk hostage, neural linking with her to prevent Nathan from body sliding her. To save Dawn Silk's life, Nathan Dayspring was forced to shoot his only son, and while Tyler wasn't seriously injured by this, it did serve to widen the divide between them. Of course, in his decades of conflict throughout the late 38th century, there were plenty of other battles that Nathan was involved in. At one point, amid rumors that Apocalypse had returned, the clan's Askani Council signed a peace treaty with the new Canaanites. However, Nathan protested this truce and convinced them to continue fighting for freedom. Of course, this also led to the loss of more comrades, causing him to question whether or not he'd made the right choice. In another incident, Nathan rallied his forces against a race of monstrous mutant-eating creatures called the Scorn. While that foe was defeated, it cost the clan even more lives, and by the early 39th century, the new Canaanites believed their foes were vanquished. Things finally reached a tipping point on December 25th of the year 3806, when the Canaanites, ostensibly led by a revived Apocalypse, defeated the remnants of another faction, the Mao-Sino Province Pact, and cemented their control over the Earth. With his own efforts to take power having come to naught and still believing himself to be the real Nathan Summers, Stryfe decided to flee that century with Atom Unit Zero and traveled back in time, arriving several years before Nathan was born. Meanwhile, by this point, Nathan Dayspring had acquired an orbital space station called Grey Malkin, which his AI professor inhabited. This station also included a time displacement core and a teleportation unit, allowing him to body slide to anywhere on Earth or time slide to any era. With this, he followed Stryfe backwards in time, landing in a similar era but emerging in Scotland. Deciding to keep his true identity a secret for the moment, he adopted the alias Cable, symbolizing the fact that he connected the future to the past. Shortly after emerging there, he was found by the Scottish geneticist Moira MacTaggart, from whom he telepathically learned to speak contemporary English, albeit with a few phrases from his natural dialect thrown in. Furthermore, Moira was old friends with Charles Xavier, who Cable intended on finding. She sent him to the United States to meet with Xavier, and on the way Cable stopped to learn more about the time period that he now found himself in. During this trip, he also briefly encountered the mutant adventurer Wolverine, as they joined forces to defeat another time traveler from the 39th century, Devon Cray. In any event, Cable did meet Xavier soon thereafter, and offered to help design the mansion's security systems using knowledge from nearly 2,000 years in the future. In return, Xavier taught Cable everything he needed to know to live in that era, including culture, philosophy, and even more about his own mutant nature. At some point in his life, Cable also jumped to other time periods and attempted to prevent Apocalypse's rule from ever coming to pass in the first place, during which he was known simply as the Traveler. In one such attempt, he believed that he succeeded in actually killing Apocalypse before he obtained his celestial bio-armor. During that fight, however, Cable's left arm was cut, and while he was able to simply reattach it, this caused Apocalypse to be exposed to and infected with the Techno-Organic virus. As a direct result of that, En-Sabah-Nur not only survived, but was ultimately transformed into the armored Apocalypse we know, creating yet another time loop. Of course, for more information on exactly how that happened, you can refer to my video on Apocalypse himself. Later returning to Xavier's era once again, Cable changed tactics and assembled his own mercenary company, both to learn more about the political and economic systems of the era, and to gather more allies. He was aided in this endeavor by a mercenary named George Washington Bridge, or GW, as well as a genius engineer and tech expert, Eisenhower Canty, better known as Hammer. Other recruits included Nina Thurman, aka Domino, a mutant woman with probability-altering powers that gave her good luck. Theo Winchester, aka Grizzly, an Australian mutant with a bestial appearance and superhuman strength. And Garrison Kane, an adolescent orphan from Canada who became a mercenary when he was only 13. This group was originally called the Wild Pack, but after being contacted by the Simkarian government, who already had a state-sanctioned mercenary force of the same name, Cable's group changed their name to the Six Pack. During this time, Stryfe was also building his forces, involving himself in weapons smuggling and other illegal activities. Complicating matters further, Tyler Dayspring also traveled back in time to that era, and using technology from the future, became an international arms dealer known simply as Tolliver. Between the time travel, the false identities, and the conflicting agendas, things got somewhat convoluted, but the long and short of it is that Tolliver, working through intermediaries, essentially played both sides against each other, working with Stryfe to maintain drug routes, while hiring the Six Pack for missions that put them into conflict with Stryfe's forces. One of these encounters was particularly devastating for the Six Pack as they attempted to steal valuable data from one of Stryfe's bases, only for Stryfe himself to arrive and take Garrison Kane hostage, threatening to kill him if the disc wasn't returned. Hammer intended on acquiescing to this demand, not willing to risk his young teammate's life on a mission that they weren't even getting paid for, but for Cable his personal war took priority, and he shot Hammer to stop him, breaking his spine and ultimately leaving him paralyzed. Making matters worse, Stryfe seized the disc in the confusion anyway and escaped while Cable attempted to follow, abandoning his teammates and leaving them trapped with the explosives that they themselves had planted in the base. With no time to disarm them, the remaining members of Six-Pack narrowly survived. However, Garrison Kane was caught in the blast and lost both of his arms. In the wake of this, Kane joined a new incarnation of the Weapon X program run by Canada's Department K, and his missing limbs were replaced by advanced cybernetics. As such, for a time, Kane adopted the storied codename Weapon X. Sometime after that conflict, Stryfe began assembling mutant followers of his own, building a militant terrorist organization called the Mutant Liberation Front, whose members included Thumbelina, who could reduce her size, Wildside, who could distort perceptions, Strobe, who could envelop herself in an aura of heat, Forearm, who had 4 arms, Sumo, who had superhuman strength, Reaper, who could paralyze with a touch, Kamikaze, who could propel himself through the air, Dragoness, who generated bioelectric flames, and Tempo, who could manipulate the flow of time. Cable, meanwhile, occasionally made trips to the 39th century and presumably other eras, at one point bringing his satellite Greymalkin back to Xavier's era with him. During one such trip, he found evidence that one of Xavier's new mutants, Sam Guthrie, aka Cannonball, would live for well over 200 years, and began to suspect that, like Apocalypse, Sam was a type of immortal mutant called an External. Seeking both to guide Sam's ascension and to gather forces in his fight against Stryfe's MLF, Cable returned to the Xavier Age and took the new mutants under his wing, becoming their leader and mentor. This version of the team included Cannonball, Sunspot, Warlock, Richter, Boom Boom, and Wolfsbane. However, over the following weeks, their roster changed dramatically as Cable forged them into a mutant strike team. By the time the group was rechristened as X-Force, only Cannonball and Boom Boom remained, joined by Shatterstar, Feral, Warpath, and Domino. This, of course, was the beginning of X-Force, but it is also the end of this week's video. So if you want to know what happens next, well, you just have to dive into some early 90s back issues. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me once again give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!